Hello, this is going to be a short tutorial on some of the basic two-dimensional drawing tools inside of Fusion 360. We're going to cover the line tool, the rectangle tool, and the circle tool. And I will show you the basics of using a linear and circular pattern. We'll talk about the dimension tool, and we will talk about the the process of creating constrained profiles inside of Fusion 360 and why that is important. I would imagine that this tutorial will probably take about 30 minutes. So if you have any questions, please feel free to come into the lab or message any of the instructors on campus, and hopefully we can get your questions answered. We look forward to seeing you guys in class, and without any further ado, let's begin the tutorial. So, first things first, we always create, whenever we're starting opening a new file, we always create a component. So I will just call this component part 1 because I'm just going to be making just doing some generic examples of how these tools behave, so I don't have anything specific in mind. From there, we're going to create a new sketch. I'm going to sketch on the XY plane, which is the plane that's defined by the red and green axes on the screen. And then the first tool I'm going to demonstrate is the line tool. So the line tool creates the most basic type of geometry that you can interact with inside of Fusion 360. And you can see here that from just a few clicks, I created a shape. And once I completed that shape, it turned a pale transparent blue on the inside. This is the visual indicator in Fusion that this profile is fully enclosed, and you can make three-dimensional geometry from it. We'll get into the three-dimensional tools in just a moment. I plan on doing that as a separate tutorial, where I'll have some more specific objects in mind that we're going to create. So for the time being, just remember that when you see this pale transparent blue, that means whatever profile you sketched is fully enclosed. As an example of what it looks like when it's not fully enclosed, you will see the inside is just completely transparent. And even if you draw very closely to the edge here, as long as there is space between two line segments, that profile will remain open and Fusion will not let you create geometry from it. If you run into this problem, you can, it's a very simple problem to fix. Best practice is to select the line segment that is supposed to, or the endpoint of the line segment that is supposed to complete the profile, and hold down left click and drag it over until it's on top of the other line segment and you see a small blue square around your cursor. If you let go, you'll see that the profile closes and you now have a complete profile. So there are some other things that you can do with the line tool. The line tool, while it can make straight lines, it can also make curved lines. If you click and hold on the line tool, you can create a radius line, and you can move these in in different directions. Although there are some limitations, it's not a purely free-form line tool like the spline tool, which we'll talk about later in the quarter. But you can make fairly complex and organic shapes with the line tool as well, and still create fully enclosed profiles. So that's a preview of the line tool. Going to delete this, and let's open up the rectangle tool. So you can see here that when I selected the rectangle tool, this menu here changed. And that's because the menu for all of the tools that are used in Fusion 360 is context driven. So if I have the line tool selected, this sketch palette menu will give me options that pertain to the line tool. If I have the rectangle menu, it will give me options that pertain to the rectangle tool. If I have the circle tool selected, it will give me options that pertain to the circle tool, etc. Back to the rectangle tool. There are three primary ways that we can create rectangles inside of Fusion with this tool. We can use the 2-point rectangle, which we just simply click between 2 points, and Fusion will create a rectangle based off of those 2 points. The shortcut for the rectangle tool, by the way, is the R key on the keyboard. And we can make a variety of shapes or a variety of rectangles with the 2-point rectangle tool. There is also a 3-point rectangle tool that will let you create rectangles at different angles if you find that that is needed. And then finally, there is the center rectangle, which will create a rectangle from a central point and let you adjust their dimensions like so. So I'm going to demonstrate. I'm sure the eagle-eyed of you that are watching the tutorial noticed that when I began dragging, we got a couple text boxes to appear. This is actually very convenient. We can begin adding dimensions to the shapes that we create with the primitive shape tools. So that's going to be the circle tool, the rectangle tool, and a few other ones that we'll get into in later tutorials. Whenever you see these text boxes appear, though, you can simply enter a value. And you will notice that once I do that, the shape that the rectangle tool is creating automatically resizes itself to conform to the dimensional values that I'm entering. And you will also notice that there are two small lock icons, one next to each of the text boxes. This means that once I hit enter, Fusion 360 will automatically constrain this box to these dimensions. So in this case, this edge and this edge are 20 millimeters across, and these two vertical edges are 25 millimeters high in relation to the XY plane. You will also notice that when I clicked enter, that the perimeter of this box turned black. That's the visual indicator that this box is fully constrained, and Fusion 360 understands exactly where it is located in space and how big the box is relative to the point of origin, which is the center point right here. If I recreate this box, out here, you will notice that once I move my mouse away, this box is still blue. And that's because Fusion 360 is actually missing a key piece of information. And while it understands the size of this box, Fusion 360 does not know the location or the coordinates of this box relative to the origin point. So we can simply use our dimension tool, which is the next tool that I want to talk about, to add in this additional information so Fusion 360 understands where this box is supposed to be located. We're going to select the Sketch Dimension tool from the top left side of our menu. It's located right here. The other way to access that tool is through the hotkey D, as in David. If we tap the D key, it will activate that tool. And we can simply click one of the edges and then click on the origin point, and we can say we want the bottom of this box to be 30 millimeters in the Y dimension from the origin point. And we could also say, we could take the other edge of this box and say that we want this box to be 100 millimeters in the X positive direction from this box, or from the origin point, excuse me. And you can see that once I added that final piece of information, the perimeter of the box turned black. And so now Fusion understands fully the size of the box and where that box is located in space. So that's the rectangle tool. We'll finish this sketch, and then I will open another file by simply clicking the or a new design, to use Fusion speak, by clicking on the plus icon here. It just simply opens up a new tab to work inside of. I'm going to create a new component one more time because we're working inside of a new file. And I'll call this, just for brevity's sake, part 2. I'm going to create a new sketch, and I'm going to sketch again on the XY plane. Now I'm going to demonstrate the circle tool. And the circle tool is both simple but very powerful in Fusion 360, because Fusion 360 has some additional functionality in it that allows circles to be created in a variety of ways that, depending on the context of what you are working on, can greatly speed up your efficiency in the software and make your life much, much easier at the same time. We'll get into all of those different scenarios throughout the quarter. And as you become familiar with the software, you will develop an understanding of when it would be better to use one method of circle creation versus the other. But I will demonstrate, I believe, most of them in this tutorial. Yeah, we'll be covering all of these options here in the sketch palette menu for the circle tool. So first and foremost, the simplest way to create a circle is to simply click a point, move your mouse, and click again. You can do this at the origin point. You can do this anywhere on the sketch plane, just like with the rectangle tool. Just like with rectangles, Fusion will need some additional information to be able to fully constrain this geometry. So we can add a diameter callout and then provide some information on the X and Y position of that circle. You can see that it turned black. If you create a circle directly on the origin point, all you will need to provide is a diameter. If we have two circles here, and you can do this with any piece of geometry that you draw in sketch mode, is you can actually use already fully constrained geometry as a reference point to other geometry that still needs to be constrained. And so if I call a distance, for example, between this circle and this circle, and the origin point, we can see that we have formed a, we've fully constrained this circle, but we have done it in such a way where we did not directly reference the origin point for one of these dimensions. We can also use this same technique without having to directly reference the origin point at all. If I grab a dimension between these two circles and then these two circles, let's see if I can make that a little cleaner to look at. There we are. We did not directly reference the origin point with either of these dimensions, but because Fusion understands where this circle is located relative to the origin point and where this circle is located relative to the origin point already, it can infer and calculate the exact location of this circle relative to the others. This same technique can be used to define all types of other geometry that you create in the 2D sketch mode. Okay, let's really quickly cover the other circle modes. I'm going to set up a somewhat contrived scenario here, but this will let us demonstrate how these other circle creation modes actually work. So the first one I want to point out is the 2-point circle. You can select any 2 points between one point and another to create a 2-point circle, just like that. The reason that you would use this versus a regular circle, there's not a whole lot of difference here, and I would say probably 9 times out of 10, if you can create the circle with the 2-point circle, you can also create the exact same circle with the single point circle. So this is probably the least used version of the circle tool. You can create a 3-point circle, and what this does is that it creates a circle that remains tangent to the first 2 points that you select in the process of creating a 3-point circle. You can see how the preview behaves as I move my cursor around. Then there is the tangent circle modes, and there are 2 of them. The first one is the 2-tangent circle, which, very similar to the 3-point circle, will create a piece of geometry, it will create a circle that is tangent to 2 existing pieces of geometry. And if we click that and then provide this a dimension, you can see that we can very quickly fully define this circle. The other one, and this is the one that, in my opinion, while you do not use very frequently, but when you do need it, it is very, very useful to have, and that is the 3-point tangency circle. And so if we come over here and select the 3-tangent circle, if we have a scenario where we have some existing geometry and we need to create a circle feature that is exactly the size that will fill a certain volume between 3 points, rather than having to guess or to do math to figure out the correct circle size, you can simply select those 3 pieces of geometry, and Fusion will automatically create that circle for you. And if that geometry is fully defined, like in this example, this circle will automatically be fully defined as well. So those are the different modes of the circle tool. The last thing that I would like to demonstrate will be how to use the sketch pattern tools. And so those are not located on the top menu by default. You can change that, but we will cover how to customize the interface of Fusion 360 in a later tutorial. For now, you will come to the Create drop-down menu, and you can see down here that we have 2 pattern options, linear pattern and circular pattern. Or, excuse me, rectangular pattern and circular pattern. I'm confusing my terminology. I am still in the process of transitioning from SOLIDWORKS to Fusion 360. And we also have another tool that I'm going to demonstrate very quickly, and that is the mirror tool. So I think I'll begin with the mirror tool since that is the most straightforward. I'm going to select my line tool, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select this construction option. You can do this with any of the tools that create 2D geometry, and what the construction option does is that it tells Fusion that this line or this dimension or this piece of geometry that you're drawing in two-dimensional space should not be used to create three-dimensional geometry. It is simply a reference line. This can be very useful for in a number of scenarios as we go through the assignments in the quarter. When and where to use construction geometry will become a lot more apparent, but it's a very deep topic and it's highly situational on what the best practices are for any given situation. So um, for the time being, just know that you can create construction geometry out of any 2D geometry that you draw. From there, I'm going to grab our rectangular tool, and I'm going to create two rectangles. And, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We're going to create one rectangle. And we'll give it some dimensions. And we will call out a distance from the origin point. Now, let's say that we had a pattern that was supposed to be symmetrical, and we did not want to, and we didn't want to bother recreating this rectangle like we just did. That's a lot of clicking, that's a lot of individual operations. And in CAD, we want to be fast. So we're always looking for ways to make our workflows more efficient. So the mirror tool is one of these tools. This tool is also available by default from the top menu. If we activate it, you'll see that we get a new context menu here. It's going to ask us for objects to mirror, and we will select the line segments that we wish to mirror, and then we will select an axis to mirror about, which will be that construction line that we created. And then we will click OK. And you will notice that when I did that, we got a brand new box that has some icons around it, around the corners here. These icons, or this symbol, is the symbol for a mirrored object that is mirrored symmetrically. So it has a symmetric constraint to the parent object that it was mirrored from. You will notice that I called out 50 millimeters here. If this object is truly mirrored correctly, the total distance between these two edges will be 50 millimeters. If we grab our inspection tool and we highlight these two edges, let me move this out of the way, you can see that we're 100 millimeters across. And because we mirrored this object when it was fully constrained, Fusion already understands where this object is supposed to be in space. So there's no need to add additional dimensions. The mirror tool, if used properly, can be very powerful and can greatly speed up your workflow. So keep this one in mind. The next pattern tool that I'm going to demonstrate is the circular pattern. This tool can be used in a variety of ways. I am going to, again, create some construction geometry. Oh, 2 is probably a little small, so for the sake of visual communication here, I'm going to make this about 15. And then I am going to create a number of rectangles in a circular pattern. around the origin point here. If you'll give me just a moment. I've been using some constraints to kind of speed this along a little bit. I will talk about how to use geometric constraints in another tutorial. So we have this rectangle fully defined in space, and we want an array of them spread circularly around this our point of origin here. We're going to come down here to the circular pattern. We're going to select Objects to Pattern, and we'll select the line segments we wish to pattern. And then we are going to select the center point of our pattern. And as soon as we do that, we'll see that we get some additional options. We are going to create a pattern that is a full 360 degrees. However, you can certainly create a partial pattern and call out a specific angle that you wish the pattern to stop at. I'm just going to stick with the full 360 degrees today. And then I am going to say we want 24 of these. And then I'm going to click OK. And immediately, we have a pattern of 24 of these rectangles, equally spaced around in 360 degrees of rotation. This tool can be very useful and greatly speed up your drawing and workflow. And additionally, the rectangular and circular pattern tools and the mirroring tool can also be used on three-dimensional geometry. We'll demonstrate that also in a later tutorial. But just keep in mind that you are not constrained to using the pattern tool only, or any of the pattern tools, only inside of the 2D sketch mode of Fusion 360. You will also notice that all of the perimeters are black, and that is because we fully defined this dimension here. One other thing to note, let me reactivate this sketch, is that if I come and change a dimension on the parent pattern, or the parent object that was patterned, all of the other corresponding copies of the original sketch profile will change accordingly. This also is an incredibly powerful piece of functionality when you are creating more complex pattern or 2D sketches that have repeating patterns in them that you might need to make changes to as you go about the sketch process. So keep that one in mind, and we'll move on to the final tool that I'm going to demonstrate in this tutorial today, and that is the rectangular pattern tool. So here, I'm going to create a circle. I'm going to give it a diameter of 10. We are going to create a vertical distance of 90 and a horizontal distance of 50. From there, we're going to create a rectangular pattern of these circles. The object that we are going to pattern is that circle. Now, when we're doing the rectangular pattern, we can define the quantities of copies in two directions. And so we can select directions from existing geometry if they already exist, or you can simply use the arrows here. So if we click and drag down here, by default, the pattern tool will create the called out quantity of the pattern. I believe this one needs to be 10. There we go. Oops. Let's Control Z and reactivate our rectangular pattern here. Objects, direction. There we are. Let's say that's 7. And then in this direction, for across 100 millimeters, let's say we also want this to be 7. We can click OK, and we've very rapidly created a grid pattern here that would be very tedious to manually create by creating all of these circles and then individually defining them. Whereas with the rectangular pattern tool, we can simply define a shape, fully define it, and now we can just copy that pattern over and over again as needed. So for certain types of objects that you're going to CAD in this quarter, these tools, the pattern tools, will save you a lot of time. So keep them in mind. And this is the last tool that I wanted to demonstrate in this tutorial. So I will end it here. If you have any questions, like always, please feel free to find us in the lab. And we look forward to seeing you guys in class.